honored. Dr. Morrow, please come in and join us.
What is our format?
Yes, 10 minutes for each of you for your presentations, and then we hopefully will have 20 minutes for a discussion. Let's see what questions come in. But otherwise, we'll make sure we at least have some engagement amongst ourselves on the topic.
Very good.
And if there is there a particular preference? This is one thing I didn't cover. Who would like to go first? In what order? I'll begin with our respected guest here, our senior interfaith.
Well, I'm happy to say a word. Yeah, kind of set the context, perhaps, about fear in the culture, and then
wonderful.
That'd be a good way to do that.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And would you like to follow that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Wonderful.
We'll speak from the podium. Yes?
Perfect.
Okay.
And then we'll
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. We will begin our program for the evening here, this panel. The title you've already read, Role of Faith in a Culture of Fear in America. My name is Kareem Irfan. I'm from Chicago, and I'm delighted to welcome you all. Those who are from outside Chicago, welcome to our Windy City, and for those here, glad that you could all join us. I'll take 2 minutes and set the tone for what we will be talking about. I had the privilege of giving the Eid al-Fitr khutbah at a mosque here, and one of the points I made there was, as we approach the Independence Day holiday, let us be clear as Muslim Americans that we love and appreciate this nation and its core values of liberty and justice for all of its citizens. I said, let us be clear that we are proud of how this country extends the blessings of freedom and equality to all its citizens, and that we are proud of its ongoing commitment to the difficult but necessary obligation to remedy inequality. And one final point I stressed was that we must come together, particularly in these difficult times when there is a pervasive sense of polarization and fear in society, that we must come together as a community, but also a nation, by responding wisely but firmly to voices which are attempting to drive a wedge amongst people of different faiths and backgrounds and colors. And I wanted to make it clear that on behalf of the Muslim community, we must stand up with our fellow citizens to ensure that not just Muslims, but no minorities are discriminated against and denied basic rights based on hatred, exclusivity, xenophobia, or Islamophobia, or any other concept that persecutes faith groups or minorities. So today, then, we have 3 scholars and recognized leaders in this field. What I would like to do is very quickly give you a brief, very brief, because these are folks with a tremendous background, and I could spend a half hour in addressing each one of their wonderful background. But for purposes of setting the stage, very quickly, we will begin with Reverend Dr. Michael Kinnamon, who joins us from the rarefied levels of global ecumenical leaders. He's the past General Secretary of the National Council of Churches, and he has served the National Council of Churches as chair of the Council's Justice and Advocacy Commission. He was dean at Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky, and he has a doctorate from the University of Chicago Divinity School. He will be followed by Dr. John Andrew Morrow, who's on my left here. Dr. Kinnamon is the gentleman, distinguished-looking gentleman in the middle. Dr. Andrew Morrow was born in Montreal, Canada, received his PhD from the University of Toronto, and he's the author of a large body of scholarly publications, including Religion and Revolution, Spiritual and Political Islam, as well as the critically acclaimed covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world. He's got an inspiring background, and I will be addressing that. I'll have the privilege of addressing that background at our Interfaith Unity Banquet on Sunday. So those of you who want to really listen to that, please join us for that event. It should be inspiring. But his work on the covenants set forth by the Prophet Muhammad in the post-Medinan period are an inspiration, and I definitely use them constantly in my own interfaith work. Dr. Morrow will be followed by Dr. Muzammil Siddiqi. He's a household name for his ISNA audiences, and he barely needs an introduction in this format. He's known for his service as president of ISNA, director of the Islamic Society of Orange County in California, chairman of the Shura Council of Southern California, and also chairman of the Fiqh Council of North America. He's a founding member of the Council of Mosques in the US and Canada. He has an MA in theology from Birmingham University and a PhD in comparative religion. Today, then, brothers and sisters, we will have these wonderful scholars and leaders take 10 minutes of their time to give you their perspectives on the role of faith in a culture of fear in America. What we are hoping to do is after that, we should have about 20, 25 minutes for a discussion. Should you have questions that are directly relevant to what is being talked about here, please send them on to us, and we'll try to include that in our discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin. Please welcome the Reverend Dr. Michael Kinnamon.
Assalamu alaikum. It has been my pleasure and privilege to be a speaker at ISNA conferences since 2008. I give thanks for these invitations, but also especially for the way in which ISNA has helped to build up interfaith relations in the United States. And for that, I say shukran. Fear is the topic I want to discuss in my 10 minutes as a way of setting the framework for what my colleagues may speak about in terms of fear out of the Muslim tradition and the way in which Islam has dealt with it. I have a new book called The Witness of Religion in the Age of Fear, and I'll draw a bit on that as we speak here this evening. Fear is a normal and necessary part of human life. There are many cases in which people are warranted in feeling fear. If I were a refugee from Syria or from Iraq, to be fearful would be a normal thing. But in this country, friends, you know as well as I, we have a kind of culture saturated by fear that is excessive and often unwarranted by any specific threat. And when that happens, detrimental things happen in the culture. We find that people are unable to relate to one another constructively. We often misuse public resources. And also we find that the wrong persons or groups are targeted by our government. Sociologists have noted that the United States has been saturated with fear since in many periods of its history, but including since the 1990s. This is not a particularly new thing. Already in the 90s, we began to note, for example, that there was an obsessive concern with crime, but all of that has increased in recent years. You may know, for example, that over the last 25 years, the crime rate in this country has decreased by about 50%. In 2015, there were fewer murders in the United States than in any year since 1968, when we had 120 million fewer people in this country. And yet, 2/3 of the American population says that fear is on the increase and believes that it's out of control. Do you see the point I'm making? There's a fear in the culture. You can see this, for example, with regard to incarceration rates. Nearly 25% of all persons globally who are behind bars are in prisons and jails in the United States, despite the fact that we are 4% of the world's population. And 18 of our states now spend more money on jails and prisons than they do on colleges and universities. A sure sign that fear is trumping hope in this culture. Another example of this would be guns. As you probably know, we have 50% more guns per capita than any other nation in the world. The second highest rate is in Yemen. And most people will say they own a gun for their own self-protection. If you're a black man, an African-American man in an inner city, you know the kind of fear that also has been behind some of the shootings of recent years. We can multiply these examples. All of this got worse at 9/11, but it didn't start there. And of course, now with the new administration, we find a rhetoric which is ratcheting the fear level even higher and higher. You know, for example, that a person is 4 times more likely to be killed by lightning than to be killed by a terrorist in the United States. And yet, if you ask the American public, surveys show they think 50% say that they are worried that they or a member of their family will be a victim of terrorism. Refugees are a good case in point. A recent study found that since the Refugee Assistance Program began fully in the 1970s, there have been 3.25 million official refugees in the United States. 20, let me say that again, 20 of those have been in any way arrested or implicated in terrorist activities. That is 0.00062%. There have been 3 Americans killed by refugees since the 1970s, that is, over the last 4 decades. All 3 were killed by Cubans in the 1970s. And yet, as you know, last November, a majority of governors from American states said that they were going to bar Syrian refugees from entering their states out of fear for the security of their people. And of course, do I need to name the travel ban? I think I'll leave it unsaid. What we need to say is that there is no legitimate security purpose behind the travel ban or this concern from our governors. Rather, what we see are policies today which are aimed at reducing the fear of people who have been told falsely that they should be afraid. You know this better than I, Muslims in the United States. Let me give you another survey, which I think if you've not seen it, you'll find funny and tragic. A reputable institution in the UK surveyed the United States population and found that the average American believes that there are you ready, 54 million Muslims living in the United States. That would be 17 out of every 100 people in the United States being Muslim. Do you know the real statistics? 1 out of every 100, 3 million, for which I give thanks to God, but you hear the problem. Most of the people surveyed said they didn't know a Muslim, but they had been told that they are dangerous people, and therefore there must be a whole bunch of you. You hear the problem, where fear becomes a part of the culture. It's not just that people are afraid, it's that we now live in a state of fear in the United States where we view public events through the prism of fear. And when this happens, terrible things occur. By one estimate, we spend $500 million in this country per victim of terrorism. $500 million is the total amount spent last year on research for Alzheimer's, which kills 80,000 Americans a year. You see how we've developed false priorities in this country. What I suggest in this book that's intended for study, I hope you might take a look at it, is that religion, which has often been seen as a source of fear, actually should be a kind of antidote. We ought to have a word to speak to a fearful culture, Muslims, Jews, Christians, and others as well, and we could speak it together. You know as well as I that the Quran says over and over again that there is one fear which is legitimate, which is what? Fear of God, fear of Allah. The same is true in Christianity, the same is true in Judaism. because we know that if we revere, stand in awe, or fear God, we will put in perspective those kinds of earthly fears that otherwise tend to dominate. So religion has a word to speak to this culture. The problem is we've not spoken it well, and that much of the religion which catches the headlines tends to be a fundamentalist religion, which is the, how do I say it rightly, the expression, religious expression of the world's anxiety, keeping others out, drawing lines to keep doctrines pure. We need to speak another word. We need to speak another word about our own traditions. I'll just say very quickly, because my time is running out, that in the book I spend a lot of time looking, for example, at Al-Ghazali, whose work speaks about hope and fear in balance, and that those have been held in balance, in my judgment, in a very fine way throughout the last 1,000 years of Islamic history, and is a word that needs to be heard by others of us. In the book, I suggest there are several steps that we might take together. We might, for example, begin by teaching within our own communities this kind of opposition to the fearfulness of a culture. We have a word to teach. We need to learn our own traditions. But more than that, we need to speak out together against the fear-mongering of this society. Our life together as interfaith neighbors and partners is itself a counter-witness to the fearfulness of a culture which tends to say others keep their distance. So for us to be together in a setting like this, or in our local settings, is itself an antidote to this kind of fearfulness. I'll end simply by saying that in my judgment, if we could do this, we might even push interfaith relations to a new stage. When I was at the National Council of Churches, I did so much work with Dr. Said. We were constantly speaking out together on healthcare reform or climate issues or a whole range of other matters. But at times I felt like we were responding on the surface to legislative initiatives. What if we could respond together to the deep cultural currents, such as fear, which run through our society? That might even be a way in which we could give honor to God together.
Well, that's a prepared and informed speaker. 15 seconds short of your allocated time. Kudos to you, Dr. Kinnamon. Dr. Morrow, the stage is yours.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Welcome to America, a country rooted in fear. The fear of the First Nations, the savages who, in many ways, were far more noble than the civilized. A country rooted in the fear of African slaves and ex-slaves who grew so numerous that they posed a threat to the white supremacists and colonialists who brought them here in the first place. A country rooted in the fear of foreigners, particularly the Hispanic, feared by the capitalists who brought them here by the millions as a source of cheap labor. A country founded on the fear of communists, a convenient excuse to engage in wars of imperial domination on a planetary scale. And now, a country founded on the fear of Islam and Muslims, a pretext to attack, destroy, invade, and occupy sovereign nations for highly profitable geopolitical purposes. They make a killing by killing, billions of bucks to buy bombs. They make a killing by stealing natural resources, billions of dollars in fossil fuels, and the building of pipelines for natural gas. And they make a killing by rebuilding, billions of dollars in business deals. We live in a culture of fear. The foreign policy of the US government and the Western world contributes to this culture of fear both internationally and nationally. The corporate-controlled mass media is now devoid of any real connection to journalism. They are propaganda engines that pump out sensationalistic, one-side stories that stoke the flames of fear. Muslims are stigmatized, demonized, and dehumanized. The media blames Muslims for terrorism. The media expects Muslims to bear the burden of blame for the thousands of victims of terrorist actions, actions that Muslims neither committed nor condoned. The media also ignores the fact that Muslims make up 95% of the victims of terrorism. The media focuses on the thousands of innocent people killed by terrorists while completely ignoring the fact that the war on terror has killed millions upon millions of innocent Muslims. That death count speaks for itself. The war on terror has become a war of terror. The foreign policy of the United States can only be described as a sick circle. The CIA supports Islamist extremists in the Muslim world as part of its proxy wars. They use them to fight their enemies. The conflict caused by these Islamist terrorists provides grounds for military intervention in the region. The Americans and their allies get embroiled in actions abroad. The terrorist groups that they have supported all along turn around and target the Western world. This heightens sentiments of Islamophobia. If Westerners witnessed the atrocities committed by Western governments in the Muslim world, public opinion would turn against them. They would demand an end to military actions. If they saw images of the millions of civilians that were slaughtered by their governments, they would be protesting in the streets. There would be an anti-war movement like the one that existed during the Vietnam era. So what do? How do you ensure that the public continues to support the war on terror, which is really a war on Islam and Muslims, by means of terrorist attacks, by means of false flag operations? That way, the eternal and endless war of the globalist totalitarian fascists continues unabated to the pleasure of Big Brother, or as we know him in Islam, the one-eyed liar. The philosophy is clear. Keep the focus on fear. So let us examine the issue of fear, its dangers, and its consequence. As Imam Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, the first Imam and the third Caliph of Islam, stated, "People are enemies of what they do not know. People are enemies of what they do not know." So what is fear? A phobia is a fear, an extreme or irrational fear or aversion to something. There are literally hundreds of phobias. In some cases, the phobic person feels sentiments of dislike, disapproval, prejudice, hatred, discrimination, and hostility towards the object of the phobia. Ignorance is the breeding ground of fear. It is the petri dish in which the bacteria of fear is cultivated. Fear of the unknown, as my esteemed colleague explained, is a survival mechanism. Human beings have lived in family groups, in clans and tribes for tens of thousands of years. People who were known to you, people who looked like you, people who acted like you, and people who spoke like you were a sense of security and safety. Outsiders or others were unknown. They were unvetted. They were viewed and treated as a threat. This fear of the unfamiliar is the root of tribalism, racism, sectarianism, and nationalism. If unchecked, it gives rise to colonialism, imperialism, and globalism. It leads to death, destruction, and suffering. Hatred is the product of fear. Fear is the product of ignorance. So what is the opposite of ignorance? Knowledge. So what is the cure to ignorance? Knowledge. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made the seeking of knowledge obligatory on all Muslims, male and female. He told us to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. He told us to seek knowledge even in China. He commanded his companions to learn foreign languages and learn about other religions and cultures. Knowledge is of two kinds, knowledge of God and knowledge of self. But both are intertwined. As the Messenger of Allah alayhi salawatu wasalam said, whoever knows himself knows God. Whoever knows himself knows God. The path to the divinity passes through our singularity. We are the mirrors in which God sees himself. When we know ourselves, we know God. When we see ourselves, we should see God. Everything that exists is a manifestation of God. Everything that you see or sense is a sign of the Supreme. Every signifier points to the signified. If I see God in myself and myself in God, I will see God in others and others in God. We need ilm, knowledge. We need ma'rifah, or direct knowledge of the divinity. We need knowledge of self that translate into knowledge of others. As Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes explicitly clear in Al-Quran Al-Kareem, O humankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that ye may despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous of you. Humanity is called to unity. We are called upon to be one with each other and to be one with the One. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said, none of you has faith until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. None of you have faith until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. He did not say Muslim neighbor. He said neighbor. In short, the command applies to all human beings. As Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asserts in the Holy Quran, as for those who divide the religion and break up into sects, thou hast no part in them in the least. Their affair is with Allah. He will in the end tell them the truth of all that they did. We must oppose destructive sectarianism in the Muslim community. There can and should be diversity. However, there should also be unity within that diversity. As the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, is reported to have stated, difference of opinion in my community is a mercy for people. Difference of opinion in my community is a mercy for people. We must move from destructive theologies of hatred and injustice to constructive theologies of compassion and justice. We must build bridges between the people of the Qibla and the people of the book, namely between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Speaking of the Ahl al-Kitab, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this to say, not all of them are alike. Of the people of the book are a portion that stand for the right. They rehearse the signs of Allah all night long, and they prostrate themselves in adoration. Jews and Christians are not all the same. They must never be condemned categorically. We Muslims have been stereotyped. Let us not do to others what we do not like others to do to us. As Imam Ali, may Allah bless his glorious countenance, said, our enemies are not the Jews or Christians, but our enemy is our own ignorance. Our enemies are not the Jews or Christians, but our enemy is our own ignorance. If Jews, Samaritans, Christians, Zoroastrians, and members of other religions and faith communities only understood each other better, they could come together on common ground. In fact, this is precisely what the Quran commands. Say, O people of the book, come to a common word between us and you, that we shall worship none but God, and that we shall ascribe no partner unto him, and that none of us shall take others for lords besides God. The Ummah of Muhammad, the community of the Prophet, was never the realm of exclusivism. It was always the realm of pluralism. We must reconnect the Muslim masses with the true teachings of the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Sharia. We must reconnect the Muslim masses with the true teachings of spirituality, tasawwuf, and Irfan. We must reconnect the Muslim masses with the ethical principles, or akhlaq. We must reconnect the Muslim masses with a true understanding of history. And, most importantly, we must teach Muslims how to think critically so that they do not succumb to the scourge of literalism, fundamentalism, and extremism. In America today, in 2017, we live very much in a culture of fear. There are those that sow, fertilize, irrigate, and cultivate hatred. You reap what you sow what you reap. If you spread hatred and violence, you get served with hatred and violence. It is a sick circle. Let us help break that cycle. The only way to fight fear is through faith. The only way to fight fear is through faith. The only way to fight ignorance is through knowledge, knowledge of self, and knowledge of God. So let us pray together in the words of the glorious Quran. O my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Rabbi zidni ilma. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well done, Dr. Morrow. Please, Dr. Muzammil Siddiqi, the stage is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessing of Allah be upon all of you. I want to thank both Dr. Kinnamon, Dr. Morrow for their eloquent message that how we should be out of fear. Fear is a natural thing in the human being as long as it is reasonable, as long as it is not excessive, as long as it creates some kind of precaution. If it is that way, it's of course a natural thing. But if it goes excessive, then it becomes paranoia. It becomes a disease. And it becomes irrational, then it becomes phobia. And it creates hate. And then it creates violence. So that's why it is very important that people should be very concerned about that. Today, we see there is poverty, there is epidemics, problems of diseases. We see natural disasters, environmental pollution. I think these are the things that we should be concerned about. We should be spending our resources there. There is ignorance. We have to give education. These are the things that we should spend resources on that. But unfortunately, instead of paying attention to these real issues for which we could be concerned and take the precautions, human beings have become afraid of human beings. They are afraid of human beings because of their races, because of their colors, because of their religion, because of their nationality. There are some bad people, there are some evil people, there are some criminals who try to, some terrorists who try to create fear. Terrorism, that means that to terrorize people. There are people who are trying to create fear. Yes, we should be concerned about that. But at the same time, we should not become so terrified that we cannot move. And then we become afraid of each other. That means we are giving victory to those terrorists, criminals. This is what they want. So it is very important that we should understand things because politicians are trying to exploit this thing for their own agenda. And the resources of the countries are being wasted unnecessarily Instead of putting them into the positive use, they're going to the negative use. So this is the concern. This should be the concern of all religions. This is the concern of Islam, and this is the concern of all other religions. We should try to work together to see how we can create an atmosphere of understanding of each other, knowing each other. You know, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that when people are free from poverty and fear, it's a blessing of God. In the chapter number 106, Allah has counted as a blessing. أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. He gave them enough resources for their food, for their sustenance, and saved them from fear. So saving the people from fear, that is one of the blessings of God. God wants to give this blessing to the world. In another place, the Quran has mentioned the story of a people. In chapter number 16, you have that. It is mentioned the story of a people. قَرْيَةً كَانَتْ آمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنَّةً يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا رَغَدًا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ فَكَفَرَتْ بِأَنْعُمِ اللَّهِ فَأَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ. There was a community that was living happily, contented. Their sustenance was coming from every direction. Very happy. But then they became ungrateful to God. So God clothed them with the blanket of poverty and fear. That's why we should be concerned about that. Be thankful to God what He has given you. Use it in the right way. Be grateful. Care for other people. Care for your neighbors. Care for the strangers. Care for the refugees, for the immigrants. These are the things that will increase the blessings of God. And they will take away the fear. الذين آمنوا ولم يلبسوا إيمانهم بظلم أولئك لهم الأمن وهم مهتدون. Those who believe and they do not do oppression, for them is the safety, for them is the peace. They will live happily. This is the challenge. So what we need today, we have to understand that we are all one family, children of Adam and Eve. All human beings are one family, regardless of their races, colors, religions, wherever they are from, but they are all one family. So this is the human race. So we have to be concerned about our family, all humanity. God has given dignity to every person. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have honored the children of Adam. Does not say honor Muslims only, or does not say honors Arab only. Like كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. All the children of Adam, we have given them honor and dignity. Recognize the dignity of all people. Justice for all people. See that nobody is denied, which is a golden rule. And the golden rule is, you find it in every religion. Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Confucianism. Oh, every religion speaks about that. That do not do to others what you do not want to have to be done to you. Love for others what you want for yourself. This is the basic message. If people just follow this principle, humanity will be at peace. So we have to remove injustice. We have to do justice to all people. And the people are innocent unless proven guilty. A very common sense principle. People are innocent unless they are proven guilty. No guilt by association for anybody, for people of any race, any color, any religion. And mistakes of some are not the mistakes of all. If people can understand and take these principles, we will remove the fear from our own hearts. And God's blessings will come. Because the real blessing comes from God. Allah inna awliya Allah la khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun. Quran says it again and again. Those who are friends of God, those who are with God, they shall have no fear. They shall have no grief. That is the thing that will come. This is the witness of religion. Religion should stand for that. That is, we are all one people. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The noblest of you are those who are the best of you in piety. in righteousness. جَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We have made you nations and tribes so that you will know each other. So this is the path. This is the path for all of us to follow. We should not frighten anybody, and we should not be afraid of anyone. Should we only have the fear of Allah? And fear of Allah does not mean there is a fear of the monster. Fear of Allah means reverence of God, the awe of God, awe of the majesty of God, the reverence of God, and also fear of punishment that will come when we deny God and we deny the acts of righteousness. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard some fine words of wisdom there from our three scholars and speakers here. I want to take this opportunity to present to you three important books that are directly relevant. The first one, it's entitled A Muslim and a Christian in Dialogue, written in East Africa by a Sunni Muslim scholar and a Mennonite Christian professor. This has an interesting background. Dr. Said came across this book. He was impressed, and he had promised to somehow make sure that copies of this book would be printed and made available to as many people as possible. So there has been a printing of 3,000 to 4,000 copies, and the books are around. Please make sure that you pick it up. We also have two books that were directly referenced in our talks here. The first one, this wonderful book, I consider this an absolutely essential possession in anybody's library. The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World by Dr. John Andrew Morrow. Please make sure that you check this out. Not just check this out, do not leave the convention. Since you're so committed enough that you've come to this particular session, this directly relates to what you need to equip yourself to understand the post-Medinan society better and to deal with interfaith relations. Make sure you check this out. And this wonderful little book, I wish Dr. Kinnamon, I'm embarrassed and ashamed that I did not have the chance to check this out in advance because your writings are tremendous. This book, you absolutely need to have it, and in fact, I'm going to use this as the platform to jump us into some discussion right now. The Witness of Religion in an Age of Fear. What I love about this is, if you look at the end of the book, what Dr. Kinnamon does is, after setting the stage with the essentials that he spoke about in his talk today, he actually gets to what can be done, and that's the most important aspect. He specifically has 10 suggestions for people to be undertaking within our own communities and with other faith communities. So this is an absolute must-have. Please do not leave this convention without getting a copy of this. And Dr. Kinnamon, I'm presuming this is available in the bookstore in the bazaar here?
I didn't see it, actually, but...
How do we make sure? We've got to make sure people cannot leave here without your book.
I can get it through Amazon.
Okay, wonderful. So you can get it through Amazon. Let's make the sales spike up. But right now, what I'd like to do is, if you have specific questions on this topic, please bring them up. But to lead us off, I'm relying, Dr. Kinnamon, on one of the suggestions that you had, where you say in our own communities, you suggested that we practice dialogue with persons with whom we genuinely disagree. That's one of the specific suggestions you have, and I am intrigued and fascinated by that, and that touches a bit, Dr. Morrow, on your focus on this avoiding destructive sectarianism, and when we have schools of thought and understanding that differ, we somehow are simply not able to dialogue amongst ourselves. So what I would like to do is start the question, turn it over to Dr. Kinnamon, and have him elaborate on why you picked that as one important aspect of your solutions. And then if Dr. Morrow, if you could add upon it, and Dr. Muzammil Siddiqi from the Fiqh Council's perspective, tell us how we can have those discussions.
I hope my wife, who is here, recorded that sales pitch for my book. So that was the best one I've heard in a long time. Thank you. And it said, please don't feel embarrassed. The book has just appeared. Okay. So it's just out recently. Much of my work over the years has been in Christian dialogue because, I'll let you in on a secret, Christians don't agree with each other. And so we've had to have conversation over the years about all of our differences. This sounds familiar, I suspect, to Muslims as well. And so we've developed principles over those years to try and help us speak with one another. And some of those guidelines I name here in that have worked for me over the years. For example, we've found that a key principle is to allow others to define themselves. The worst possible thing for me to do would be to come here and talk to you about what Muslims believe. I need to listen to you speak to me so that I don't define in advance what you may say. That, of course, helps us to prevent caricaturing and stereotyping of the others and insists that we listen to one another. But a problem that we find also within Christian community is that we often talk to those who are easy to talk to. And that, of course, cuts down on what we might learn from others. And so this principle that you named is simply that we also try to listen to those with whom we most disagree. This is very difficult to do. There are some guidelines that I recommend specifically. I have a little coffee group I meet with from my congregation of retired guys. So we all meet together on Wednesday mornings. I think of the 8 of us, 4 voted for Trump and 4 think that's absolutely appalling. And somehow or other we have to drink coffee with one another every morning. And we find that the more we talk, the less we polarize into extremes. It's not simply a matter, for instance, of whether or not you have an access to all guns or you take away all guns. There is a continuum in between. And if we begin to explore points on a continuum rather than either ors, we find that there often is far more common ground than we thought we were going to find before. So various things like that I try to discuss in the book as ways of saying that listening to those with whom you most disagree undercuts your own pretensions, reinforces the great religious teaching of humility, and insists that finally the truth is not ours, it is God's. And together we try to search for that truth by listening to points of view that are unlike our own. I think I'll let my colleagues say what they have to say about this. In case I don't get back up here, I wanted to say also, this is the first time I've been with Dr. Morrow, and I appreciated very much his work and what he's had to say. But Dr. Siddiqi is, for me, a great joy and gem of Southern California. I consider it a great blessing that we're in the same part of the country. Thank you for lending him to us in Southern California.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I am one of the few scholars who has the opportunity to speak to many different audiences. I commonly address Sunni conferences. I will give the Friday khutbah at Sunni mosques. I am invited to speak at many different Shi'i conferences. I've been invited to give majlis in Shi'i mosques. I talk at Sufi centers and zawiyas and tekkes and so on, and I join them in their dhikr. Even the Ahmadiyya invited me to give a talk at one of their conferences. I speak at churches, and I speak to Jewish groups. I speak with Zoroastrians. Not everyone can do this. Why am I able to do this? Because I focus not on our differences, but I focus on commonality, what we share in common, all right? And we do so in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Thank you.
I see that extremists in every tradition, in every background, they have three problems. One of them is they think that we have nothing in common with the other. They are different from us, we are different from them. There's nothing between them and us. Secondly, they think that we are good and they are evil. That's it, black and white. We are good and they are evil. And the third thing is, they think that we have to control the other. Somehow we have to bring them under our control. And these are the issues that are creating the problem of alienation, no dialogue, no understanding. If you understand that we have a lot of things in common, nobody can say that I have nothing to do with the other. Every tradition we have a lot of things in common. Yes, we have differences, but we have a lot of commonalities. To take the commonalities, appreciate them, respect the differences, work out. Second thing is, nobody is absolutely good, except only God is good. Everybody has some problem. We have to acknowledge our own mistakes, our own shortcomings. Recognize that. Instead of saying, you are bad, you are this, you are this, you are this. I have difficulty, I have problem, I have shortcomings. Let us work it out. So you improve, I improve, we work to improve together, make ourselves better people. And nobody should control anybody else. Yes, no, the world is to have to live together in peace and harmony. What is all this domination and cultural domination, religious domination, this domination, that? No. We have to live together. And that's the only way we can really have a real dialogue. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the close of the assigned time, but if there are particular questions, we'll still try to address them. Yes, sir. Very quick questions, please.
Thank you very much for having such a nice panel. Everyone spoke very nicely. I'm an educator, used to be a general surgeon in another life. What I surmise from your presentations is ignorance is top of the list. And that speaks for Muslims as well as Christians, as well as non-Christians and Jews and everybody. 1.6 billion Muslims, 1 billion don't understand the Quran because it's not in their language. So ignorance is rampant. So we rely on our mullahs or our imams or our scholars to guide us. And I'm sure it's the same in other faiths as well, Christianity and Judaism, rabbis, the power of the pulpit, you want to call it. Have we ever attempted to reach out to the clergy on a grassroots level that 52 weeks a year we can ask them to guide Christians, Muslims, and Jews that it's okay to dialogue? I mean, this is once a year, ISNA, right? And half of us will go back thinking, maybe, maybe not. But the guy who's in my mosque, who I believe in, who gives the khutbah every Friday, if he just says this thing, I'm not able to convince him. Would it be not much more powerful, and has anything been done in that direction?
Wonderful. I think Dr. Muzammil, Siddiqi, from the Fiqh Council and the ISNA perspective, would you like to just address that? And then Dr. Kinnamon, we definitely want your answer to that from the Christian perspective.
Things have changed a lot. I mean, now our...
The question basically was, what is being done in terms of having clergy of the different faiths at the grassroots level promote this concept of dialogue between different faith communities?
Yes. I think things have changed a lot since we're talking about. Yes, there are, but 20 years ago or so, there were people who are thinking that we don't have to have, we just talk about ourselves. But now, wherever I go in the communities, and this is the work of ISNA also and other organizations as well, that we must have interfaith relations. The whole office that ISNA opened in Washington, Interfaith Relations Office, Community Relations Office. And that's how we're building this relationship, shoulder to shoulders. Not only just dialogue, but also cooperation, collaboration on social work, on services that we are doing that. And I think the more we work together, the more we have better understanding of each other. So this,
Please allow me to interrupt, but I think he raises a very important point. You're in a very good position to address that. What are we doing to make sure for instance, within the Muslim community, the imams, we've got 150 mosques in Chicago. How are we promoting this concept of the imam standing up there in the pulpit of the Prophet Muhammad and saying, it is your obligation to go out and talk?
yes.
Especially in the Bible Belt,
All over.
all over.
Yes, this is certainly a very important work that has to be done. We have a council of imams, we have the fiqh council, and they are working on this direction. I mean, there's a lot of work that has to be done, too, because many people do not know others. So we have to invite them. We have, in California, we have started this open mosque day. And also I think in Chicago now we started that, open mosque day. That is inviting our neighbors to come to the mosque. And the imams meet with the people and then every community is asked to participate in the interfaith relations, interfaith work. So it is working, it is coming out in that direction, but certainly more work has to be done. Thank you.
With due respect, I would like to remind our community that in the 80s, when I used to live in the Orange County, we used to sit on a panel every Saturday with Jews and the Christians. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. So this thing happened. It is from the, on Friday prayer from the, Imam. Yes, it is very important. And I think in a lot of the that is happening, not just in Minnesota.
It is happening, sir, but I think the point is, it is, and I'll tell you, being an activist with spending time in so many mosques, I'll be the first one to admit it's not happening enough.
Yes, sir.
We have to do more of that.
Not in Orange County. We were not worried
Oh.
about Orange County.
That's right, please go ahead.
Well, I'm worried about Orange County, so I'm living in that part of the country, and I'm thankful for the work that goes on in education centers, Islamic centers around the country. I can tell you as a Christian educator, as the dean of 2 Christian seminaries, we do teach interfaith relations as a key part of the curriculum now in most of what we call the mainline church seminaries and Catholic seminaries. I won't speak for the more evangelical churches, but I can speak for the Anglicans, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and so on, and the Catholics. But what we teach is not the 5 pillars of Islam and so on. We teach them why, as Christians, they should be in dialogue and neighbors to you. So it's not that we want them to be experts in Islam. I hope that makes sense to you. What we want them to be is experts in the Christian tradition and why it compels us to care about one another as children of one Creator. So that's very important. I want to affirm that. I hope you hear that as good news. Let me now take slight exception with one thing that you began with, and it comes out of Dr. Morrow's very fine comments. I take his point about the importance of education very seriously, but I'm worried that fear itself is so deep-rooted that education alone won't address it. We may want to come back and deal with this. I expect he agrees with this. On my book, I sent out my book to my brother in advance. It's filled with statistics such as the ones that I gave you about fear in American culture. He wrote back and he says, "I just love this book." He's an actuary. That is, he deals with numbers. He goes, "I love all the statistics in it." But he said, "I don't think that will carry the day, because you know as well as I that today people doubt expertise and statistics. So that I could give all the numbers I want, I can talk about all the surveys and studies that I want, but someone who is already convinced that this is a scary culture is going to feel that way anyway." How do we address a fear which is deeper than that kind of, we can't educate our way out of it only, though that is a key point. I thought Dr. Morrow made it very well. But there's also a kind of pre-conscious, deeply rooted character to fear. You know as well as I do, in this culture there are many people who look like me who are afraid that the culture is shifting under their feet. This used to be a white Christian place in their mind. It hasn't been, but in their mind. And so they're afraid that immigrants and refugees and others coming in are changing the cultural landscape that they've felt. I can give them all the statistics in the world, and it won't change that deep perception. What I need to do is to teach the Christian faith in a way that compels them to see their faith in different ways, and perhaps that will have some impact, and that we need to work together, of course, to show how interfaith relations can also benefit them in this culture that they're fearful of losing. But this is a very difficult thing. There is a broad anxiety in the culture, and anxiety often needs to find a fear, a thing that it can be afraid of, because anxiety is too difficult, it's too diffuse. And so, after the Second World War, lots of anxiety in the culture, and we found communists to fear. Today, there's lots of anxiety in the culture that it's shifting under their feet, and so we've got to find a scapegoat, somebody to be afraid of. Friends, I'm afraid, as Dr. Morrow, Dr. Siddiqi have said, much of that is focused on Islam, on Muslims, and that's a very difficult thing. So yes to education, but also yes to teaching our faith and preaching it from our pulpits so that we indeed address that deep-rooted faith which it only alone can deal with the fear which is also in that deep-rooted place in our hearts.
I think that is well put. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm informed that we can extend this session by another 10 minutes because there isn't one immediately following. So that gives us the chance to take on a few more questions. I'm assuming we have some 10 minutes of time from our esteemed panelists here. So with that, sir, you had your hand up. What's your question? If you ask your question quicker, we can answer it as opposed to comments.
First of all, just as a provocative thing, I respectfully disagree with the analysis why we have this fear. In fact, in your lecture, you said some of the reasons for that.
Sir, ask your question. If you have a question, we'll have them address it.
The question is, we don't know about Hinduism, we don't know about Buddhism, but we don't have problem American with them. See, that's one thing. The other thing, we know each other as Sunni and Shia, right? We know we have a lot of knowledge, and here we are fighting each other and killing each other. So that means still till up this moment, we don't know what is the real reason. So it's not education, because we don't know the Hinduism, Buddhism, we don't have problems.
Fair enough. Let's have them address that.
We know the Sunni, and we have problems. So
Okay. If I understand that correctly, then, okay.
for this, but I'll just give one example about the reason for this fighting between the East and the West. It started after Crusader Wars. After Crusader Wars, when the European defeated, they want to study why we were defeated by Muslims. They started Orientalism. And this started 8 centuries ago, how we dominate the Middle East and the Muslim world. And that's one of the, so I think besides education, we need to study the grievances, why there is a problem. So we are still not yet. And as far as Sunni Shia, I think the Muslim Ummah is committing suicide at our time, unfortunately. We have a big problem.
Thank you.
Committing suicide as Ummah.
Would somebody like to address that directly? If I understood it correctly, I think the 2 points the brother made is the fact that ignorance leads to fear is not absolute. There are other factors too, and in that support, the specific question was in the American context, for instance, the Americans in general don't know much about Hinduism either. Yet there isn't this backlash or questioning or concern about that, so there is something beyond ignorance, is what he was talking about. Secondly, if knowing about each other leads to a solution, he's referring to the situation in the Muslim communities right now across the world where there is so much disharmony and violence between Shias and Sunni when we know enough about each other. Okay. I just hope we don't eat up all the 10 minutes. Those are tough questions, I can understand.
Yes, I think we are raising a very good point that we have to understand the grievances also. And it is wrong to say that all the difficulties and the problems are because of religions. I mean, religious differences are there, but this is not the only issue. So there are many other issues. Shia Sunnis were living together for 1400 years. Yes, there are some places, sometimes difficulties there. In Iraq itself, for example, 35% of the marriages were between the Shias and Sunnis. But the problem came. So this problem sometimes exploded. Protestants and Catholics have been living together and sometimes, but some problems came in Northern Ireland and others. So these issues come. That's why it is very important that people should be conscious of that. So it's not just faith issue. Faith is important, but it's not the only one. Other grievances are there, and we have to understand that problem between Arabs and Jews are not just because of Islam and Judaism. It will be wrong to say that they are fighting each other because they believe in Judaism and they believe in Islam. No, the other issues are there. So these are the important. I had a meeting in Spain where the rabbis and the imams came together, and some of the imams came from Palestine. Some of them even from Gaza, they came. And then some Jewish rabbis were there from Israel and from other places. The issue that people were saying, the imams were saying that this is not the issue. It's not the issue of religion. We are hungry. Our children are dying because they have no food. What is the solution for that? So that's why it's very important to take all the other issues as well.
Well, I don't want to overstep my bounds as the moderator, but I do want to bring us back to the focus of this topic. It is directly related to the role of faith in countering this culture of fear, and that's where it was very important, Dr. Kinnamon, that you brought us back to the commonality amongst our faiths as to what generally fear is driven by, and that there indeed is a relatively direct solution based on the core beliefs of our faith. And you, of course, you related directly to the Islamic precepts and then tied that into the Christian concepts too. But maybe, just as we close it out, Dr. Kinnamon, could I call upon you to just go back to that point and crystallize that there indeed is a solution. It may not be the solution, but there is a solution to tackling this pervasive fear that we have in society by going back to our faiths. I think it'll set us back on a good tone to understand and benefit from this session.
First, let me give thanks to you for your presence here, and may we go from here to be purveyors of hope and not fear. It seems to me that across the religious communities, we see several themes that are lifted up that I hope we will emphasize. One of those, Dr. Siddiqi presented beautifully in his opening remarks, and it has to do with human interdependence. One of the things we so often forget, it seems to me, is the interdependence of the human family. To emphasize that is itself an antidote to fear. You remember Dr. King's comments in this country, we're all connected in a single garment of destiny. Once we realize that, it also undercuts part of the fear of otherness that Dr. Morrow talked about. So that's one theme. You see it running through the Quran. You see it running through all of our religious texts that I hope we lift up together. The other one that I named in my comments particularly is that we tend to trust in the wrong things to make us secure. This culture has really majored in that. We trust in money, we trust in power, we trust in status. They all prove to be ephemeral. And so we surround ourselves with things to make us secure. And then when those begin to shift, we look for people to blame because we now feel as if we're without security. And that's a bad thing to feel. How do we feel secure? Trust in the right thing, which of course is what we were talking about. That is Allah, God, that we trust in that which is eternal, that which is the foundation of our lives, and only in that. So if our faiths together could teach that, it seems to me, we have a common ground. To go back to Dr. Morrow's comments, he seeks for a common ground, not simply those things on which we differ. Yes, the things that make us different are important. I don't believe the same things that you do in all ways. You don't believe the same things that I do. But what finally holds us together, it seems to me, is also of great importance. And those two teachings alone are teachings that we could lift up together with real integrity that would counter the fear of this culture. The final word that I'll say is that the opposite of fear is not invulnerability. You can live in walled communities, even walled nations, dare I say, and still be fearful. The opposite of fear is hope. To live in fear is to live in anticipation of a threatening outcome. To live in hope is to live in anticipation of promised fulfillment. We know about that as people of faith. I know about it as a Christian. You know about it as Muslims. Our neighbors know about it perhaps in other ways. But that hope itself is a way in which we can counter the fear of this society. I hope, thanks be to God, that we do it.
I would just like to make a few brief comments. The issue is not just one of religion. Religion is exploited for geopolitical reasons. You're dealing with interests. You cannot enslave people that you know and that you understand. You have to dehumanize them and so on. I refer to slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, in this country, we had manifest destiny. Take the land, exterminate the Indians, give it to the pioneers. Well, they had to demonize the Indians. They're all a bunch of savages and accuse them of all kinds of things. The Spaniards, when they conquered the Americas, their leaders exploited their religious zeal. And they told them that the indigenous inhabitants of the Americas were all pagans, they're all polytheists, they sacrifice human beings, they worship the devil, you're going to get all kinds of blessings by killing these people. And so people with vested interest, people in power, they will exploit issues like religion or race, nationalism, and so on for their gain. In terms of the issue of ignorance in the Muslim community, I would disagree with you. I think ignorance is rampant. Sunnis do not understand Shiites. Shiites do not understand Sunnis. I could go on, really. The ridiculous things that I have heard Sunnis say about Shias, you wouldn't imagine. And the ridiculous things that I've heard Shiites say about Sunnis, okay? I mean, you have the usual thing. Well, the Shias, they worship Ali. They believe that Ali is Allah, and this and that. And I met some Shias who were telling me, well, Sunnis, they hate the Prophet's family. What kind of a Sunni can hate the Prophet's family? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. It's preposterous. So there's an enormous amount of ignorance, and people exploit that. But you find in some areas where people have coexisted and they have commingled for centuries that you don't necessarily find that type of misunderstanding that can be exploited. My colleague here addressed the issue of education and mentioned that education does not suffice. I absolutely agree. Words do not suffice. What we need is action. And of course, that is education. You can, there are many ways of teaching. You can teach by lecturing. That's just preaching and preaching and preaching and so on, right? Some people think that da'wah is just about preaching and preaching. But there's also teaching through action, through your behavior. And that is often far more effective and valuable because people, when they hear all kinds of nonsense, they just block it out. They don't believe it, okay? So it's kind of like a defense mechanism. They're not open. There are some people that you cannot dialogue with, you cannot reason with. However, you can touch them through your actions. By doing good deeds. Muslims are among the most hospitable and kind people on the planet. If your neighbors get to know you, and they have a taste of your hospitality and your kindness. They will not other you and think that you're some type of threat to them. Let me give you some concrete examples. Over the past few years, there have been many anti-Muslim demonstrations, biker gangs and white ring racists and so-called Christian fundamentalists and extremists have attempted to intimidate the Muslim community, right, by surrounding mosques. And they're armed to their teeth, okay? They've got machine guns and everything. They want to intimidate us. By the way, if you had an African-American child with a toy gun, he would be shot like that by the police. But when white people gather and, they're ready to go to war, they never do anything. Now, Muslims had two options, right? Well, we bring our guns. We're Americans, right? We got guns? No, that wasn't the approach. They went to these people, these Islamophobic people, these hate-filled people, and they said, Marhaba, ahlan bikum. Please join us in the mosque for tea, right? And they won some of these people over. And they went into the mosque and they learned about the mosque. What? He said, where's the bomb-making factory? No, we have the couscous-making factory over here. And so and there were several cases of these people who actually ended up embracing Islam because they realized that what they were reading in the newspaper and what they were seeing on television was not an accurate depiction of the Muslim reality. Many churches have been burned in Canada and the United States. They tend to be African-American churches. And we have had young Muslims organized fundraising drives to rebuild these churches. That's Islam in practice. African Americans, of all Americans, have the most favorable view of Muslims. Why is that? You think it just happened overnight? Muslims have been actively engaged with the African American community since the 1930s. Since the time of W.D. Farad, the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, Warith Muhammad, Malcolm X, we have been working in those communities for decades. We have credibility. They know us as human beings who genuinely care about them. And so, when you have someone like Sister Linda Sarsour, who's very active with Black Lives Matter, they respect her, right? This is what we need to do. This is true Islam. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the conclusion of this session. The speakers will may be around for a little bit if you want to approach them, but I do want to make sure that we remind ourselves of the significance of these books. So this one, that is available on Amazon, and let's make sure we do give Dr. Kinnamon's wife a supportive spike that she can go back very, very pleased and happy about. It is The Witness of Religion in an Age of Fear, Kinnamon, Kinnamon. And this one, The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World, Dr. John Andrew Morrow. This should also be available. Do not leave the convention without getting these two books. I guarantee you this will become essentials in your library. Yes. Yes, that's right. So these books are available, and Dr. Saeed had left 5 of these to be distributed. What I'd like to do is the 3 people who actually asked the questions, I would like to take the moderator's privilege and make sure they get their copies first, because you were upfront in making this a productive session and engaging. That leaves 2 more copies, and whoever comes, I'll leave them here, and you folks can grab it. But for the speakers, okay, the speakers, I know you asked a question. You did, sir. And you did.